All right, welcome to another episode of The Deep Dive. You know the drill. You give us the sources and we extract the good stuff. It's like having your own personal research team.
Exactly, cutting through the noise and getting straight to the most interesting, most relevant info.
And for this one, you pointed us towards a pretty, well, huge topic, Mount Everest,
Yeah, iconic, legendary, and also with a ton of information out there. You sent over some pretty comprehensive Wikipedia excerpts.
which is perfect, gives us a lot to dig into. So
Sure.
uh, I guess our mission today is, well, to really understand Mount Everest.
Yeah, going beyond just the basic facts, we're going to uncover some of the surprising details, the historical context, the stuff that really makes this mountain so fascinating.
Yeah, like where did all the different names come
Yeah.
from and how in the world did they figure out how tall it is?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And then there's the geology, how did this thing even form? And what kind of life exists up there?
And of course, we've got to dive into the human side of it, the history of expeditions, the triumphs, the tragedies.
Yeah, the whole evolution of climbing Everest, from the early attempts to, well, to the modern day, sometimes controversial stuff.
So buckle up, everyone. We're headed to the top of the world.
Let's do it.
All right, so
Huh.
first things first, let's tackle the names. I mean, most people know it as Mount Everest, right?
Right.
But it turns out that's just one piece of the puzzle. Locally, this mountain has been known by other names for, well, centuries.
Yeah, like Sagarmatha in Nepali.
And Kwomolungma in Tibetan.
Which, if you look them up on Wikipedia, both redirect you to the Mount Everest page. So, the other names are acknowledged.
But it's interesting, right? Like, why is it that Mount Everest became the dominant name?
Well, it goes back to the British and the Great Trigonometrical Survey of India in the mid-1800s. Andrew Waugh, the British Surveyor General, basically argued that there wasn't a single universally recognized local name, which, considering Sagarmatha and Komolungma were already in use, it kind of makes you wonder.
Yeah, it does feel a bit convenient, doesn't it? But anyway, Waugh proposed naming it after Sir George Everest, his predecessor.
Right.
And here's the kicker. Sir George himself wasn't a fan of the idea. He even pointed out that Everest wasn't easily written in Hindi or pronounced by the local people.
Ah,
Yeah, it just goes to show naming things is never straightforward.
yeah, it's all about power dynamics, historical context, and all that.
Totally. But regardless, the Royal Geographical Society officially adopted Mount Everest in 1865. And it's kind of funny, the way we pronounce Everest today, it's different from how Sir George himself pronounced his name.
Oh, really?
Yeah, his pronunciation was closer to Everest.
Huh, interesting.
Okay, and then we have the Chinese names. There's Zmul Eng Feng, which is basically the pinyin transliteration of Kwomolungma. And historically, it was also known as Shengma Feng, meaning Holy Mother Peak.
Wow, so there are multiple layers of cultural and historical significance tied to this mountain.
Totally. So we've got the names down. But how about the height? I mean, it's one thing to say it's a giant mountain, but how do they actually figure out, how tall it is?
So this is where the Great Trigonometrical Survey of India comes in again. It was this massive project to map the entire Indian subcontinent.
Wow.
And eventually they wanted to extend it into the Himalayas. It was an incredible undertaking, honestly.
Yeah, just trying to picture it.
I mean, they were hauling these huge 500-kilogram theodolites, these instruments for measuring angles.
500 kilograms. That's like,
Yeah, over 1,000 pounds. It took like 12 people just to carry one. They finally reached the foothills of the Himalayas in the 1830s, but then hit a wall, literally.
Nepal was closed to foreigners, right?
Exactly. So they had to figure out a way to measure the mountains from a distance.
That kind of a challenge.
And this is where it gets really cool. In 1852, this Indian mathematician and surveyor named Radhanath Sikdar, he was working at the survey headquarters in Dehradun. And he made these calculations using trigonometry to determine that Peak XV, as Everest was known back then, was the highest point on Earth.
Wait, so he did that all from Dehradun, hundreds of miles away?
Yeah, using measurements taken by another surveyor named Nicholson. It's incredible when you think about it.
Mind-blowing.
But even after that, it still took almost 2 years for Andrew Waugh to officially announce it. Think about it. They had to verify all these calculations dealing with things like light refraction, barometric pressure, all sorts of factors that could skew the results.
I mean, yeah, with the technology back then, it makes sense.
Right. It really shows how meticulous they had to be. And fun fact, the initial calculation in feet came out to exactly 29,000 feet.
Oh, really?
But Hua added 2 feet to it, just to avoid any suspicion that it was a rounded-off estimate.
I love that. There's even a joke that Wah was the first person to put 2 feet on top of Mount Everest because of it.
That's hilarious. But the quest for accuracy didn't stop there. In the 20th century, we had the Survey of India in the 1950s, recording a height of 8,847.73 meters. And then a Chinese survey in 1975 came up with 8,848.13 meters.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah, both of those measurements included the snow cap, though. And then in the late 20th century, GPS technology enters the picture.
Game changer.
Totally. In 1999, an American expedition put a GPS receiver right into the bedrock, measuring 8,850 meters for the rock head plus another meter for the snow and ice.
But even then, Nepal didn't officially adopt that figure.
Exactly. And the debate continued. In 2005, a Chinese team announced their own precise measurement, 8,844.43 meters for the rock height. This led to a period of, well, let's just say differing opinions between China and Nepal on the official height.
It sounds like a bit of a height difference of opinion.
You could say that. But thankfully, they reached a consensus in 2010, 8,848 meters as the official height, with Nepal also acknowledging the Chinese rock height measurement.
So everyone's on the same page now.
Well, mostly. Because then, in 2020, a joint Chinese-Nepalese team announced a new unified height, 8,848.86 meters.
Wow. So after over a century of back and forth with all these different methods, we finally have an official, jointly agreed upon height for Everest.
It's a testament to our desire to really understand our planet, to quantify these massive features.
Totally. It's fascinating. You know, this mountain, we spend so much effort figuring out exactly how tall it is, but what exactly is it made of? And what kind of life, if any, can survive up there?
Yeah, let's get into the nitty-gritty, the geology, the environment. So Everest is mainly composed of 3 different rock formations. The Kwamolangma Formation right at the top, the North Kull Formation below that, and then the Rongbuk Formation at the base.
Okay, and what's interesting about those?
Well, for one thing, the limestone found at the summit, that stuff dates back to the Cambrian and Ordovician periods. We're talking hundreds of millions of years ago.
Wow.
And what's even crazier, that limestone was once at the bottom of an ocean.
So this mountain, the highest point on Earth, was once seabed.
Yeah, incredible, right? Think about the immense forces that had to be at work to lift that rock up to such heights.
And get this, the uplift is still happening. The Himalayas are still being pushed higher because of the collision between the Indian and Eurasian tectonic plates.
Yeah, it's a slow process, but it's ongoing. And the Wikipedia article you sent mentions something called river drainage piracy. Basically, one river capturing the flow of another.
Oh, I read about that, yeah. And that can influence the uplift too, right?
Exactly, by changing the erosion patterns and reshaping the landscape.
So it's not just the tectonic plates, it's like a whole system of forces.
Yeah, and all of that contributes to making Everest what it is today.
Wild.
Yeah.
And in recognition of its geological significance, it's been designated as an IUGS Geological Heritage Site.
Yeah, which is well-deserved.
But what about life up there? I mean, you'd think it'd be pretty barren.
You'd think so, right? But there's actually a surprising amount of biodiversity, both plants and animals, that have adapted to those extreme conditions.
That was one of the things that really surprised me when I was reading through the sources. It's not just, some lichens clinging to rocks.
Oh no, it's much more than that.
There are these high-altitude plants, but then also spiders.
Yeah, and the bar-headed goose. That bird migrates right over the Himalayas.
Crazy, right? And we can't forget the mammals. The Himalayan tahr, snow leopards.
Himalayan black bears, too, although they tend to stick to the lower elevations.
And then there are red pandas, those adorable little guys.
And pikas, those rabbit-like creatures.
Oh, and get this. One expedition found 10 new species of ants up there. 10.
Wow. It really goes to show life finds a way even in the most extreme environments.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And thankfully, there are conservation efforts in place to protect this unique ecosystem, Sagarmatha National Park on the Nepal side, and Kwamolangma National Nature Reserve in Tibet.
Yeah, those are vital for preserving this incredible biodiversity.
But let's be real, the climate up there is brutal.
Oh yeah, it's categorized as an ice cap climate, which means average monthly lows are way below freezing. Like in January, the average minimum temperature is minus 36 degrees Celsius.
Ouch.
And even in July, the warmest month, the average minimum is still minus 18.
No thanks.
Yeah.
And of course, we can't talk about climate without mentioning, climate change. The glaciers are melting, the landscape is changing.
Yeah. It's a serious concern. There's even talk about relocating Everest Base Camp because the current location is becoming unstable.
That would be a huge change.
For sure. And speaking of monitoring the climate, Everest has had some pretty impressive weather stations up there. The balcony station at around 8,430 meters was the highest weather station on Earth for a while. Sadly, it stopped transmitting data in 2020, but the information it gathered was invaluable.
Yeah, amazing stuff. So we've talked about the names, the height, the geology, the environment, but now let's get to the heart of it, the human story, the expeditions, the people who dared to challenge this mountain.
Yeah, it's a story full of ambition, perseverance, and unfortunately tragedy.
We don't know for sure if anyone ever reached the summit in ancient times, but the documented history of climbing attempts really begins in the early 20th century with the British,
Right, and because Nepal was closed to foreigners back then, they had to approach from Tibet.
which adds another layer of complexity, right?
Absolutely. So the first series attempt was in 1921, a reconnaissance expedition that reached about 7,000 meters. Then in 1922, another expedition managed to get to 8,320 meters.
Wow, that's the first time anyone had ever climbed above 8,000 meters.
Exactly, a huge milestone.
And then, of course, there's the 1924 expedition with Mallory and Irvine.
Yeah, that one's shrouded in mystery. They were last seen heading for the summit on June 8th and never returned.
Did they make it? We may never know for sure.
It's one of the great unsolved mysteries of mountaineering history.
But moving on to a confirmed success, the first officially documented ascent was in 1953 by Tenzing Norgay and Edmund Hillary,
Yeah, an incredible achievement. And they did it via the Southeast Ridge in Nepal.
which has become the, I guess you could say, the classic route.
Yeah, the standard route for sure.
And it's worth noting, Tenzing had actually reached a pretty incredible height the year before, 8,595 meters, as part of a Swiss expedition.
Oh, wow. So he already had a lot of high altitude experience going into that historic climb.
Exactly. And then in 1960, a Chinese team made the first recorded ascent from the North Ridge on the Tibetan side.
Right. And after that, it seemed like the floodgates opened. You had the first American ascent in 63, the first traverse of the mountain that same year.
And in 1970, there was this huge Japanese expedition, almost like a siege, with hundreds of climbers and tons of equipment. They even tried to ski down from the summit.
Wow. Ambitious.
Yeah, but they didn't quite make it with the skiing part. Then in 1975, Junko Tabai became the first woman to summit Everest.
Amazing.
That same year also saw the first ascent of the Southwest Face, which is considered one of the most challenging routes.
Yeah, pushing the boundaries of what's possible. And then, of course, you have Reinhold Messner and Peter Habler in 1978, achieving the first ascent without supplemental oxygen.
That's just, I mean, how?
It's almost superhuman. And then in 1980, a Polish team made the first winter ascent, which really marked the beginning of this incredible era of Polish winter Himalayan climbing.
The Ice Warriors.
Yeah, a fitting nickname.
But sadly, as we know, Everest has also seen its share of tragedy. The Lola tragedy in 1989, 5 Polish climbers lost.
And the 1996 disaster, which really brought the dangers of Everest into the public consciousness.
John Krakow's book Into Thin Air and Anatoly Bukhriv's The Climb, those gave us such powerful and very different accounts of that event.
Yeah, and it sparked a lot of debate about climbing ethics, safety, and, the whole commercialization of Everest.
Absolutely. And later analysis even suggested that weather patterns might have played a role, causing significant drops in oxygen levels.
Right. And then in 2006, there was the controversy surrounding the death of David Sharp, with climbers passing him on the mountain without offering assistance.
And the incredible rescue of Lincoln Hall that same year, who'd been left for dead but somehow survived.
It really highlighted the ethical dilemmas that can arise in those extreme conditions.
For sure. But there were also acts of heroism, like in 2007, when Canadian climber Megan McGrath initiated a high-altitude rescue.
Right, showing that compassion and courage can still exist even in the face of such danger.
Looking at the overall stats, up to 2010, there had been over 5,000 successful summits by over 3,000 individuals.
And those numbers have just continued to climb. But while the overall fatality rate has decreased, the sheer number of climbers means that, sadly, the total number of deaths has also increased.
It's a complex equation, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's interesting to see how the popularity of the different routes has shifted over time.
Yeah, often due to political factors like restrictions on the Tibetan side.
Right. And the 2010s were a decade of both records and tragedies.
Yeah, like in 2014, there was that devastating avalanche that killed 16 Nepali guides.
And then the 2015 earthquake and avalanche, which effectively shut down the climbing season.
But even with those setbacks, 2018 and 2019 saw record numbers of people reaching the summit, raising concerns about overcrowding.
Yeah, and all the potential problems that come with that, the impact on safety, the environment.
Absolutely. And it's crazy to think that even during the pandemic, in 2020, a Chinese survey team managed to summit to remeasure the mountain's height.
Talk about dedication. And in 2022, we had the first all-black team summiting Everest, which is super inspiring.
Absolutely. It's incredible to see how the face of Everest climbing is changing.
So we've covered a lot of ground here, but let's get practical for a moment. Like, what does it actually take to climb Mount Everest? Permits, logistics, routes, all that good stuff.
Yeah, it's not as simple as just deciding to go and grabbing your ice axe.
There's a whole lot of bureaucracy involved.
Starting with permits. On the Nepalese side, a permit alone can cost around $11,000 per person. And if you try to climb without one, you can face hefty fines and even jail time. Nepal usually issues hundreds of permits each season, but there have been closures due to events like the Olympics and the pandemic. And the Chinese side in Tibet also has its own set of regulations and fees.
So step one, a lot of paperwork and a hefty chunk of change.
Exactly. And since the mid-1980s, we've seen this huge rise in commercial climbing expeditions.
Yeah, it's like a whole industry now.
It really took off after this businessman, Richard Bass, successfully climbed Everest with a guided expedition. Before that, it was mostly just like hardcore mountaineers.
Right, but now there are companies offering guided trips for, well, pretty much anyone who can afford it.
Exactly. And the costs vary widely depending on what's included. A budget option might run you around $7,000, but that's mostly just for basic logistics.
Okay.
Whereas a fully guided expedition with Western guides, Sherpa support, oxygen, all that, you're looking at anywhere from $40,000 to $80,000 or even more.
Whoa. So step two, even more money.
Yeah, Everest doesn't come cheap. But now let's actually talk about the climb itself. There are two main routes: the Southeast Ridge in Nepal and the North Ridge in Tibet.
And the Southeast Ridge is the more popular one, right?
Yeah, it's considered the standard route, technically a bit easier, and it's the one Hillary and Tenzing used for the first ascent.
All right, so let's say we're going up the Southeast Ridge. What does that look like?
So first, you have to trek to Everest Base Camp. It's a multi-day hike, usually takes about a week, and it's crucial for acclimatizing to the altitude.
Right. And then from base camp, things get real.
Yeah, you have to navigate the Khumbu icefall, this treacherous maze of ice seracs and crevasses that's constantly shifting. It's one of the most dangerous parts of the climb.
Scary stuff.
Above the icefall, you reach the Western Karem, which is a relatively flat glacial valley.
Relatively flat, but still super high up.
Oh yeah, still over 6,000 meters. And then comes the Lhotse face, this massive, steep wall of ice and rock. Climbers ascend using fixed ropes, passing landmarks like the Geneva Spur and the Yellow Band, and eventually they reach Camp 3 on the South Col.
So Camp 4 is the launching point for the final push to the summit.
Exactly. And that final push is usually done in the middle of the night to try to reach the summit before the afternoon storms roll in.
So you're climbing in the dark.
Yeah, it's intense.
And what about the summit itself? What's it like up there?
Well, it's surprisingly small. It's been described as being about the size of a dining room table.
Wow. After all that effort, you finally reach the top of the world, and it's a dining room table.
Yeah, kind of anticlimactic, but the view, I imagine, is incredible.
I bet.
So from Camp 4, you follow this exposed ridge called the Cornice Traverse, and then you hit the last major obstacle before the summit, the Hillary Step.
I've heard about that. It's like this near vertical rock face.
Yeah, about 12 meters high. There are usually fixed ropes there to help climbers, but it can get really bottlenecked when there are a lot of people trying to summit on the same day.
Right, because everyone has to wait their turn.
Yeah, and at that altitude, time is literally of the essence.
Now, what about the North Ridge route? What are the main differences?
Well, for the North Ridge, you start at base camp on the Rongbuk Glacier. The ascent to the North Col is done using fixed ropes, and then you traverse the north face. There are 3 tricky rock steps to navigate, the first, second, and third steps.
And I think the second step is the one with the infamous Chinese ladder.
That's the one. It's this, like, metal ladder bolted to the rock face. It used to be even scarier, but they've made some modifications to make it a bit safer.
But still, pretty intense.
Oh, yeah. And then, of course, there's the death zone, the area above 8,000 meters where the human body just can't acclimatize.
Yeah, that's where things get really serious.
It's incredibly dangerous up there. Extreme cold, low oxygen levels, high winds, your body starts to deteriorate. You're at a much higher risk of altitude sickness, frostbite, cognitive impairment.
It sounds terrifying.
It is, and that's where the majority of deaths on Everest occur, often during the descent, when climbers are exhausted and their bodies are already weakened.
It's a reminder that Everest, for all its beauty and allure, is an incredibly unforgiving environment.
Absolutely. And interestingly, statistically, some other 8,000-meter peaks are actually considered even more dangerous than Everest.
Really?
Yeah, but Everest definitely gets the most attention, both good and bad.
Makes sense. And then there's the whole debate about supplemental oxygen,
Right, that's a big one. The vast majority of successful summiters now use oxygen, but there's a small group of elite climbers who attempt it without.
which is just mind-boggling to me.
It's incredibly risky, and even with oxygen, the low levels up there can impair cognitive function, making it harder to make good decisions.
Yeah, in those situations, a clear head is crucial.
Absolutely. And then in terms of climbing seasons, spring is the most popular because the weather is generally more stable.
But some people climb in autumn, too.
Yeah, but that comes with the added risk of unstable new snow. And winter climbs are extremely rare, only attempted by the most hardcore climbers.
Yeah, those conditions are just brutal.
No kidding. So we've talked about traditional climbing, but Everest has also been a playground for some pretty amazing aviation and extreme sports feats.
Yeah, it's wild. Like the 1933 Houston flight expedition, the first time planes flew over the summit.
And then in 1988, Jean-Marc Boivin climbed to the summit and paraglider down. Incredible.
There have even been hot air balloon flyovers.
And a pilot landed a helicopter near the summit in 2005, though that was pretty controversial.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And in 2011, someone paraglider off the summit and then went on this crazy summit-to-sea adventure, going from the top of Everest all the way to the ocean.
Wow, talk about a journey.
And then there are the helicopter-assisted ascents, which are, well, let's just say ethically debatable.
Yeah, that's a whole other conversation. But it's not just aviation.
Oh no, there are all sorts of extreme sports going on up there.
Skiers, snowboarders, hang gliders, paragliders, base jumpers.
Including the world's highest base jump from high on the mountain.
It's almost like a different world up there.
In a way, it is. But all of that human activity has consequences. Waste management on Everest is a major issue.
Yeah, that was something that really struck me while I was reading.
I mean, think about it. Every season, tons of human waste, discarded gear, food wrappers, it all gets left behind.
And that's polluting this pristine environment.
Exactly. And it creates health risks, too. There are barrel toilets at the base camps, but dealing with waste at the higher camps is a huge logistical problem.
I bet.
There have been numerous cleanup expeditions over the years, removing garbage and, sadly, the bodies of climbers who died on the mountain.
That must be a tough job, both physically and emotionally.
Yeah, no kidding. And to try to address the problem, the Chinese have closed their base camp to tourists.
Well, it's a pretty big step.
It is. But the waste at the higher camps is frozen, and it's going to take a lot of effort to figure out how to clean that up.
Yeah, it's a challenge, but it's one that we can't ignore. But before we wrap up, let's take a moment to appreciate all the incredible achievements, the firsts, that have taken place on Everest.
Absolutely. We've got the first ascent above 8,000 meters in 1922, the first to reach the South Col in 52, the first summit in 53, the first ascent of the North Ridge in 60.
Junko Tabei, the first woman to summit, in 75.
The first ascent without supplemental oxygen in 78, the first winter ascent in 80.
The first paraglider descent in 88.
And then there are the fastest ascents, both with and without oxygen, the first blind climber to summit in 2001.
The youngest and oldest summiters, and the incredible record held by Kami Rita Sherpa, who has summited Everest, wait for it, 30 times, as of May 2024 at least.
That's just unbelievable. And we're also seeing more and more people with disabilities summiting Everest, proving that what might seem impossible can actually be achieved.
It's truly inspiring.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, it's clear that Mount Everest is so much more than just the highest point on Earth.
It's a symbol of human ambition, a testament to the power of nature, a source of both wonder and tragedy.
We've explored its geology, its environment, its history, and the challenges it faces.
Hopefully, we've given you a deeper understanding of this iconic mountain.
And maybe sparked some curiosity to learn even more.
Exactly. But now, we want to leave you with something to think about. Given everything we've discussed, the increasing number of climbers, the environmental concerns, the risks, what do you think the future of Mount Everest expedition should look like?
Should there be stricter regulations? Limits on permits? Or is the inherent danger part of what makes it so alluring, so captivating?
It's a complex question with no easy answers, but it's one worth pondering. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Mount Everest.
Until next time.
See ya.